Here's the story of my wedding that never happened. It's the kind of thing you see online and think, no way could this actually happen to someone, but it happened to me, and I still can't wrap my head around it. Let's rewind a bit. I'd been with James since we were teenagers, high school sweethearts, then college sweethearts. He was my first serious boyfriend, and for years we were that couple everyone seemed to admire. Or so I thought. We got engaged at 22, and by 24 we had our wedding all planned out. I felt like I knew everything about him. We'd talked about our future, places we wanted to visit, dreams, even baby names. It felt like my whole life was mapped out, with James at the center of it. Here's where things get strange. My younger sister, Tasha, had always been close with James. They'd joke around, text each other, share memes, all that. Sometimes they'd even hang out just the two of them, which I thought was great. I figured it was a good thing that my family and fiancé got along. I'd heard too many horror stories about in-laws not getting along, so I never questioned their friendship. I wanted to be the laid-back fiancé, the one who was cool and unfazed. But there were times when things felt off. Tasha's ex-boyfriends, for example, were always jealous of James. They'd complain about how close she was to him, but I just chalked it up to their insecurity. I trusted James completely. Still, I'd occasionally notice little things like the way James would look at Tasha or how he'd lean in close when they talked. Small details that made me wonder, but I'd dismiss it as paranoia. I told myself, they're family now, and let it go. Fast forward to the big day, my wedding day. The day that was supposed to mark the start of my new life, where everything would finally fall into place. I was in my dress, hair and makeup done, everything set. I'd spent months planning every detail, from the flowers to the reception playlist. Friends and family were bustling around, helping me get ready, and I was a mix of nerves and excitement, feeling butterflies in my stomach. As the time got closer, I started feeling anxious because I hadn't heard from James all morning. Not even a "hey, can't wait to see you," but I brushed it off, assuming he was just as nervous as I was, maybe busy with last-minute stuff. I wanted everything to go perfectly, so I ignored the nagging feeling and kept getting ready. Finally, the time came. I was supposed to be walking down the aisle in 10 minutes. I was waiting in the back room with my dad, phone in hand, just in case James texted. My dad was chatting away, but I wasn't really listening. I kept staring at the door, waiting to see James walk in with that grin he always wore. But 10 minutes turned into 15, then 20. By the time 25 minutes had passed, I was seriously worried. The wedding coordinator came over, asking if we should delay the ceremony. Panic started setting in, so I asked someone to check on James, but no one could find him. That's when things got really strange. I pulled out my phone and tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. Maybe his phone died, I thought. I tried again, same result. I went to message him on social media, and that's when I saw it. He had blocked me everywhere. My heart sank. I just stood there, holding my phone, struggling to process what was happening. How could my fiancé block me on our wedding day? I went from confused to angry to terrified in a matter of seconds. This was James, my James, the man I'd planned my life with. What was going on? I must have called him a dozen times, hoping it was a mistake or a cruel prank, but nothing, just silence. My mom noticed something was wrong and came over, asking what was going on. I couldn't even explain it to her. How do you tell your mom that your fiancé ghosted you on your wedding day? Then my cousin Alan pulled me aside. He had this sympathetic look, like he knew something horrible. That's when he told me he'd overheard some guests talking apparently. Someone saw James leaving the venue early that morning with Tasha. They'd been spotted getting into his car, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't believe it. My own sister. I kept thinking, there's no way. Not Tasha, but the pieces started to fit together, the little glances, the private jokes, how she'd always seemed a bit too close. I felt physically sick. The room spun, and it took everything I had not to break down in front of everyone. I stumbled out of the back room, half walking, half running. I just needed to be outside, away from everyone. Part of me hoped it was a misunderstanding, that they'd come back and explain everything. But deep down, I knew James and Tasha had planned this. They'd left me here, all dressed up, surrounded by loved ones, to run off together. I must have sat outside for hours, staring at my phone, waiting for some miraculous text, some explanation. But there was nothing, just silence. Guests started trickling out, giving me pitying looks and awkward hugs. My mom kept coming over, asking if I wanted to talk, but I couldn't. What was I supposed to say? My fiancé and my sister just ran off together, but hey, no big deal. Eventually, everyone left, and I was the last person at the venue. Just me, in my wedding dress, completely alone. I don't even remember how I got home. I must have been on autopilot, just going through the motions. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my dress, feeling utterly hollow. It felt like everything I'd believed in, everything I'd planned, disappeared in one awful, humiliating instant. No wedding, no fiancé, no sister, just me, left alone to piece myself back together after the chaos of that day. You'd think hitting rock bottom like that would mean I'd start to recover right away, that there was nowhere else to fall after being abandoned in a wedding dress in front of everyone I knew. But it turned out there was still another level of low waiting for me after that day. At first, I was just numb, completely detached from reality. My phone kept buzzing with messages and calls, people asking what had happened or sending words of sympathy, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I put it on silent, tossed it aside, and tried to pretend this wasn't happening. I didn't want to leave my room or talk to anyone. Friends, family, they all reached out, but what could they possibly say to make it better? Once the shock wore off, the anger set in. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it. My mind was trapped in an endless loop of questions. Why? How could they do this to me? What did I do wrong? I was losing sleep, replaying every memory, scrutinizing every small moment with James and Tasha, trying to see if I'd missed any clues. It was torturous, but my mind wouldn't let it go. I guess I was desperate for something, anything that could make it make sense. Then I did the one thing everyone advised against. I started stalking their social media. Yeah, I know, bad move, but I needed to know what they were up to, whether they were openly flaunting their relationship or had just disappeared. Tasha had blocked me, so I used a friend's account to look. Her profile was wiped clean, no photos, no posts, nothing with James. Somehow, that made it worse. Now it felt like they were hiding something, leaving me in the dark with only my assumptions. I hit this weird phase where I wasn't just furious, I was embarrassed. I kept replaying that wedding day, remembering how I'd waited, clueless, for hours. I couldn't shake the humiliation of it all. Friends and family had flown in, dressed up, spent time and money to be there, all for me to be publicly humiliated. At some point I knew I needed help. I was barely eating, couldn't sleep, and felt like a ghost of myself. A friend suggested therapy, and at first I laughed it off. How could talking to someone possibly make a difference? It wasn't going to magically bring my life back. But she convinced me to try one session, just to vent. In that first session, I didn't even know where to begin. I sat there, staring at the wall, struggling to find words for this mess. Finally, it all came pouring out: the betrayal, the anger, the humiliation. And for the first time, someone listened without pity, without judgment. I can't say it fixed me, but it felt like unloading some of the weight I'd been dragging around. Little by little, I found ways to start rebuilding. I picked up things I'd put aside during wedding planning. I joined a book club, went to a few local meetups, and reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. I even started jogging in the mornings to clear my head, hoping to start each day fresh. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I'd feel almost okay, close to normal. Other days, the weight of it all would slam into me. I'd think about how I was supposed to be married by now, maybe even planning a family, only to remember that I'd lost not just James, but my sister too. How do you even grieve that, losing a fiancé and your sister in one stroke? Some people around me tried to be supportive, but they didn't really get it. Relatives would say things like, "You're better off without him," or "You'll find someone else." I knew they meant well, but that wasn't what I needed to hear. I needed to understand why they did this, not be told to move on as if it was just a breakup. This wasn't only about losing a boyfriend, it was about losing trust in two people I thought I could rely on. Through it all, my cousin Alan was a huge support. He was the one who had broken the news to me about James and Tasha leaving together. After that, he didn't sugarcoat anything or try to force me to look on the bright side. He just let me vent, sat with me on the rough days, and even pushed me to go out and have fun when I felt like locking myself away. He's a quiet guy, Not much for sharing feelings, but he always knew when I needed someone there. I owe him a lot for that. As time passed, I stopped checking their social media. I stopped wondering if they were happy together, or if they'd even stayed together. I realized that keeping tabs on them only hurt me, and they didn't deserve to live in my mind rent-free any longer. A few months later, I moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood, a fresh start where I didn't have to be haunted by memories of plans I'd made with James. Moving on wasn't easy, but I finally felt like I was heading somewhere. I didn't need him or anyone else to get there. I won't pretend I didn't feel like I'd lost something enormous. It felt like I'd lost all trust in people, questioning the motives of everyone around me, even my closest friends wondering if they'd end up betraying me too. Shaking off that kind of suspicion wasn't easy, and it was something I was still working on. But I was slowly learning to be okay alone, piecing together a life that didn't involve either of them. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a sad ending in a way, it felt freeing. By the end of that year, I had carved out my own routine, my own space, and a life that was truly mine. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, and I'd found a strange peace in accepting that things sometimes turn out differently than expected, and that it's okay. Looking back, I felt proud of how far I'd come. That whole mess had torn me down, but I hadn't stayed there. I rebuilt myself piece by piece until I barely recognized the person I'd once been, and maybe that was for the best. Months later, when I had finally found some sort of calm, I'd fallen into a rhythm where I didn't think about James or Tasha every day. I was working, seeing friends, going to the gym, even dating occasionally. Life was moving forward, slowly but surely. And naturally, that was when it had to be interrupted by none other than James himself. One random Tuesday night, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I said, distracted. There was a pause, and then I heard James's voice on the other end. "Hey, it's me." For a second, I thought it had to be some kind of cruel joke. My mind struggled to grasp that I was actually hearing his voice after all this time. This was the guy who'd left me standing alone in a wedding dress, who had run off with my sister, and here he was, acting like this was just a casual call to catch up. My stomach churned, and all the anger and hurt I thought I'd pushed away started rising back up. "What do you want?" James, I asked, my voice icy, trying to mask how much his call affected me. He sounded different, like he hadn't slept in days, or maybe even cried. I just wanted to talk. I know this is weird, but I need you to hear me out." My first impulse was to hang up then and there. I didn't owe him anything, but curiosity got the better of me, and I figured hearing him out wouldn't make things worse. So I stayed quiet, waiting for him to say whatever it was he'd called to say. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I had to say it. I've been a mess, trying to understand how I got here. And I finally read those messages you sent me on our wedding day." I almost laughed at that. It had taken him this long to read the desperate texts I'd sent, hoping to stop him from leaving with Tasha, the messages where I'd told him everything I'd heard about her lies, the rumors, even the pregnancy gossip. He hadn't even bothered to read them until now. "What do you expect me to say?" "James," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep calm. "You left me for my sister on our wedding day, and now you want to talk." I know," he said quickly. "I was wrong about everything. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you. I've spent months realizing just how huge of a mistake I made, and I know it's too late, but I needed you to know I'm sorry." We sat there in silence. His apology sounded genuine, but what did that change? My life had been shattered, and no apology was going to fix that. Part of me wanted to scream at him, but I just didn't have the energy, so I let him keep talking. He started rambling about Tasha, saying things hadn't been the fairy tale he'd imagined. She had become someone he barely recognized, always out with friends, burning through his money, treating him more like a bank than a partner. I could hear the regret in his voice, and maybe it felt a bit like justice, but it didn't undo what he'd done to me. "You made your bed," James, I said, cutting him off. "You and Tasha both. You hurt me in a way I didn't even think was possible. And now, just because you're unhappy, you want sympathy." "No, I don't expect sympathy," he replied, his voice breaking slightly. I miss you, that was it. I almost laughed again, this time more out of frustration than anything else. You miss me? Are you serious? You threw everything away for my sister, James. Whatever you're feeling now, that's your problem, not mine. There was a pause, and he sighed, like he'd expected this outcome. I know I can't make it right. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. I was stupid, and I lost the best thing that ever happened to me. I sat there, holding the phone, unsure of what to say. Part of me had wanted this for months, to hear him admit he'd made a mistake, but now that he was saying it, it felt empty. His regrets couldn't undo the pain or the humiliation. They didn't make me feel any better. Look, James, I said, trying to steady my voice, I've moved on. My life doesn't revolve around you anymore, and I don't want to dig up old wounds. Whatever issues you have with Tasha, they're yours to handle. I have my own life now. He didn't argue or try to change my mind. He just let out a long sigh, as if he knew this was the end. I understand. I won't bother you again, he mumbled, sounding defeated. And with that, he hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of it all. It felt like closure, but it also stirred up memories I thought I'd left behind. I hadn't expected to feel so much after that call, yet there I was, flooded with memories of the plans we'd made and the betrayal he'd left in his wake. But as the days went by, I realized I didn't feel haunted anymore. Hearing him apologize and express his regret hadn't fixed anything, but it helped me let go of the last remnants of anger I was holding on to. I didn't need revenge, and I didn't need him to be miserable. I just needed to know I was truly done with him. After that call, I blocked his number. I wasn't going to let him reappear in my life whenever he felt like it. I was finally in a place where I could breathe freely, and he wasn't going to disrupt that. That chapter was closed, locked, and thrown away. I thought James's call might finally bring me some peace, like it was the final closure I needed, but I hadn't anticipated the storm brewing with my family. Of course, it wasn't enough for James to reappear. My family had to get involved too. The day after his call, my mom reached out. Her message was casual, just a simple, "Hey, we haven't talked in a while. How are you?" It felt way too relaxed, given everything that had happened. We hadn't been on speaking terms since the wedding disaster. My family had tried to stay neutral, but somehow, neutral always meant taking Tasha's side. Even after everything she'd done, they acted like it was just a misunderstanding and expected me to let it go. So yeah, I'd kept my distance, but the thing is, when my mom reached out, I still felt this flicker of hope. I thought maybe she was finally reaching out to acknowledge what I'd been through, to actually take my side for once. Like an idiot, I replied, and before I knew it, we had planned a family dinner at my parents' house. I convinced myself that maybe this was it, the moment they'd finally see my perspective, and I'd get the validation I'd been waiting for so long. Walking into their place, I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. Memories of family dinners, movie nights, holidays, all those times when I thought we were a tight-knit family came rushing back. But as soon as I sat down, I could tell something was wrong. My parents seemed tense. My mom was making small talk, asking about work and my friends, but there was an edge to her voice that I couldn't ignore. Then, out of nowhere, she brought up James. My stomach dropped. She wanted to know why he'd contacted me and what we'd talked about. Apparently, she'd heard through some grapevine, probably Tasha, that James and I had spoken. It felt strangely intrusive, like she believed she had the right to pry into every detail of my life. "Why does it matter, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "I haven't been with James in ages, you both know that." She sighed, giving me that disappointed look she used to give me when I'd get a B on a test, like I was somehow letting her down just by not following her script. "It just seems like you're stirring up old wounds. You've moved on, Tasha's moved on," and there it was Tasha. Somehow, it always circled back to her. Tasha had moved on so naturally, I was expected to do the same, as if I hadn't been the one actually betrayed, as if I was holding on to all this just for drama. "I'm not the one who reached out," I replied, doing my best to keep the frustration out of my voice. "James called me out of nowhere. I didn't even want to talk to him." My dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable but chiming in anyway. "You know, honey, maybe it's time we all just let this go. Tasha's still family and she's had her own struggles. Can't we all just put this behind us?" That's when it hit me they hadn't called me to make things right or hear my side. They just wanted me to forgive and forget to make things easier for them. They wanted me to move on so they wouldn't have to keep dealing with the messy, awkward family drama. In their eyes, Tasha could be forgiven for anything, but I was the one holding a grudge. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice starting to shake. "She's still family? I was supposed to marry James. She ran off with my fiancé and left me standing there like an idiot, and you think I'm the one who should just move on like it's nothing?" They looked at each other, then back at me, and my mom gave me a sad, almost patronizing smile, as if I were a child being difficult. "Sweetheart, we know it was hard for you, but Tasha's still our daughter, and she needs support too." I just stared at them, stunned. The message was crystal clear. I was expected to be the bigger person, to put my own feelings aside to keep the peace. Tasha was their priority, not me, not what I'd been through. Always Tasha, the golden child who, in their eyes, could do no wrong, even when she'd stabbed me in the back. Something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back, standing up, hands shaking. "I'm done," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're asking me to ignore everything she did, to pretend none of this happened, just because it makes you uncomfortable? Well, guess what? I'm not just moving on because it's convenient for you." My mom tried to interject, but I didn't let her. I grabbed my things and walked out, leaving them there, stunned. I had always been the quiet, compliant one, the one who didn't make waves. But at that moment, I knew I couldn't be that person anymore. They wanted me to sacrifice my own peace and feelings for the sake of keeping the family together, and I wasn't going to do it. The drive home was a blur. I felt angry, hurt, but mostly just sad that my own parents couldn't see what I'd gone through, that they were so focused on protecting Tasha that they couldn't be there for me. It felt like losing them all over again. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of relief, like I'd finally stood up for myself, even if it meant burning some bridges. For the next few days, I ignored their calls and texts. They left voicemails, sent long messages, but I couldn't bring myself to listen to or read any of it. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from years of putting myself last just to keep them happy, and I didn't want to keep doing that. A few days later, my cousin Alan reached out. Alan had been my rock since the whole wedding disaster, the one family member who hadn't pressured me to just get over it or play nice. He didn't lecture me or make excuses for anyone, he simply listened. When I told him about the family dinner, he didn't look surprised. If anything, he seemed like he'd expected it. "They've always had a soft spot for Tasha," he said, shaking his head. "But you don't have to put up with it. You've done enough." Hearing that from someone who actually understood what I'd been through felt like a lifeline. He reminded me that it was okay to set boundaries to protect my own peace. For so long, I'd been caught up in trying to keep everyone else happy, and here he was, giving me permission to finally prioritize myself. That's when it hit me. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need them to understand my side, to apologize, or to make it right. I could let go without their approval. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. So yeah, maybe I was finally facing the past, but this time it was on my terms, and that felt more healing than any apology they could have given me. Just when I thought I'd finally gained some distance from all the drama, my phone buzzed with a message that felt like a punch to the gut. It was from my mom, and it was clear she'd been holding back until now. The message read, "We've been trying to reach you. It's time to stop avoiding this and come back to your family. Tasha is your sister, and families forgive each other. If you can't let this go and make peace with Tasha, then maybe you're not interested in being part of this family." I stared at my phone, feeling my heart sink. After everything I'd been through, they were now giving me an ultimatum, pressuring me to forgive or face being disowned. It was like all the progress I'd made, all the time I'd spent healing and standing my ground, meant nothing to them. I took a few deep breaths, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. Why was it so easy for them to side with Tasha? She was the one who had betrayed me, yet they were acting like I was the one in the wrong. I called Alan, the only family member who had truly stayed in my corner through it all. He picked up on the first ring, sensing the tension in my voice. "They're giving me an ultimatum," Alan, I said without even a greeting. There was silence on the line, followed by a deep sigh. "I had a feeling they'd pull something like this," he said. "They're trying to guilt you back into their lives because they want to keep up this image of a happy family, Even if it means completely dismissing what you went through. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to shout. How can they just act like none of this mattered? I was abandoned at my own wedding. Tasha and James didn't just hurt me, they humiliated me. And they expect me to just move on, all for their comfort. Alan replied, if you forgive Tasha, then they can avoid facing the reality of what she did. They can pretend it was just a mistake and move forward. They're asking this for their own peace, not yours. Hearing it laid out so plainly helped somehow. He was right. My family wasn't seeking my forgiveness because they cared about my feelings. They just didn't want to deal with the consequences of failing to hold Tasha accountable. You know what you need to do, Alan continued. You've been building a life on your own, without them. If they can't respect the boundaries you've set, then maybe they don't deserve to be part of that life. It hit me then that I'd been clinging to the hope that one day my parents would finally see what I'd endured, acknowledge how much Tasha had hurt me, and stand up for me. But that was just a fantasy. They were never going to change, and staying in their lives would only keep me in a cycle of pain. I took a deep breath, nodding to myself. You're right, Alan. It's time to let go. Really let go. That night, I sat down with a piece of paper and started writing. It felt a bit dramatic, like something out of a movie, but I needed a way to release everything bottled up inside me. I wrote down everything: the betrayal by Tasha and James, the humiliation of that day, and how deeply hurt I was that my parents had sided with Tasha. I told them that if they couldn't respect my feelings or even acknowledge my pain, then there was nothing left for us to discuss. When I finished, I read it over, my hands shaking. Reading my own words, I realized how much anger, disappointment, and hurt I'd been holding in. This letter was my chance to finally release it all, to draw a line and move forward without the weight of their expectations dragging me down. The next day, I mailed the letter. I didn't expect them to understand. I didn't expect an apology or even a reply. This was for me a final step to protect myself from any further hurt. As hard as it was, I felt lighter, knowing I'd done what I needed to do. In the weeks that followed, my family tried every way possible to reach me. My dad sent emails, messages from my mom appeared on every social media platform, and even distant relatives reached out. They all repeated the same thing: I was being stubborn, that I needed to make things right for the family. But none of it rattled me. I'd spoken my truth, and for the first time, I was at peace with that. Alan kept me updated on family gossip, and apparently Tasha was still playing the victim, as if I were the one tearing the family apart. My parents, from what Alan shared, were making endless excuses for her, brushing off what she'd done as a youthful mistake or something like that. It was maddening, but I realized it was their problem, not mine. I threw myself into my new life, focusing on things that brought me joy. I got more involved in work, took on fresh projects, and made a few new friends who knew nothing about my past. They just saw me as me. For once, I was living for myself, not bending to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. One evening, I was out with my new friends when my phone buzzed with an email notification from my dad. I felt a pang of guilt, but then reminded myself of all the pain I'd gone through, all the times they'd pressured me to just let things go for their comfort. I knew I couldn't go back to that. I deleted the email without even reading it, feeling an odd sense of satisfaction. I was done with their guilt trips and demands. As time passed, each day felt a bit brighter and easier as I stopped looking back and focused on what I wanted. Sure, there were moments where I felt a hint of sadness, reminders of the family I'd lost, but then I'd remember all that I'd gained: freedom, peace, and the chance to be myself without any strings attached. In the end, breaking away was the hardest yet best decision I'd ever made. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was a life I'd built on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.